Hi there, and welcome to episode 63 of the Analyst Brief podcast brought to you by the Cyber Hut. My name is Simon Moffatt, and with me as ever is co-host Mr. David Mahdi. David, how are we doing?
Hello, Simon. I'm doing all right. It's been some time, hasn't it?
It's been a while. I've had a few sleeps since the last episode.
Obviously.
We take the summer off, and do some actual work and things, and the whole industry has sort of changed in the space of about 3 months, hasn't it? We've had a whole host of mergers, acquisitions, funding, startups emerge, new categories emerge. Agentic AI has taken over apparently, and that's dominating the whole landscape. But I think we are still physically real. We are still real. Pinch ourselves. We are actual people doing podcasts instead of some sort of augmented thing. But I know it's good to be back. There's a lot happened, I guess, hasn't it, the last few months.
Just a little.
Where to start?
Just a little. This industry is so slow moving. Nothing really happens.
It's full of legacy tech. I mean, honestly, it's full of legacy problems, and I think some problems will be around for a long time. But obviously, the AI thing is, I guess, the two threads I see. Obviously, AI is just moving so fast. It's changing, whether it's the standards, MCP and agentic, and this sort of stuff is moving rapidly. And I think what's happened is that sort of speed of development and excitement, it is proliferating, I think, into other parts of the broader sort of technology space, be that software, hardware, cyber, identity, or whatever. And there's a bit of it's like an excitement to do things and change and actually try and tackle things a little faster. And as always, lots has happened in our sector and our sort of specific lens here. But I want to start off with something which happened a few months ago, I suppose, and we've commented on it, I guess, briefly in the sort of sidelines, which is privileged access management, PAM, the good old PAM space. It's something that's been around for, well, a couple of decades, ultimately, in the whole sort of commercial sense there. And I think there's definitely some interesting changes that have happened both, I guess, strategically and technically, and mergers and acquisitions happen all the time. There's been a couple of things which have happened the last few months. We had obviously Palo Alto and CyberArk, I should say, sort of smashing together, which is the big headline grabbing aspect there. But there's a whole host of other sort of things happening in the background. I want to sort of start off there because PAM and IGA and the associated sort of risk management of privileged identity. It's something we've had for a while, and there's definitely been this, I hate to say distress, but a little bit similar to IGA. It seems to be something organizations, they've had to deal with IGA, they've had to deal with PAM, and they buy technology, they spend a long time trying to get it implemented and working. And it often then ends up being a very subset of the use cases or a subset of the systems or a subset of the overall risk. And then they seem to iterate and want to do something different and broader and better. It doesn't seem like it's a problem that's fixed ultimately. I think PAM and IGA and others are continually iterating, they're continually evolving, as they should, really. So I want to start there, I guess.
Yeah.
First off, also bought CyberArk, which was the big conversation point a few months ago. And I guess on paper it looks quite complementary. They're very different background of vendors. I'm sure there are some overlapping customers across their sort of huge portfolio of stuff there. But look, they're from different sectors. It looks complementary. It looks like it's going to fit neatly. But what's your quick high level there? Then we can sort of go into some of the sort of competitive angles to look at as well.
Yeah. So a couple of things just to hit. Start from the top, just with PAM. And I love the Venn diagram you've got here because it gives a kind of a good sense. I'll take a provocative view. I mean, certainly when I spent my time as an analyst, one of my core functions was to look at the convergence of cybersecurity and identity, right? And obviously when you look at Palo Alto on the surface, like Palo Alto and CyberArk, that's kind of the case. But if we just move Palo Alto aside for a moment and we look at CyberArk, I really liked the direction CyberArk was going, and from a marketing perspective as well, how they were talking about we are the identity security platform. And I really have to give them kudos to that, because I think when you look at what they were doing, they were taking more of that, cybersecurity mindset, that attacker mindset, the adversarial mindset, and bringing it to the identity world. And I know you and I, Simon, have talked about the whole notion of joiner, mover, leaver, adversary. I feel like out of a lot of the identity platforms and players, they were the main one that was actually could back up what they were saying, whereas many others just sprinkle identity security. And frankly, if you pull any employee, because I've done this to some of these platforms, and I'm like, what is identity security? And people just reiterate joiner, mover, leaver. I'm like, yeah, it's security-ish, but if it was really security, why do we have problems with identity breaches, right? But when you go and look back at that, it's like, okay, I like that direction. But overall, my view when I was at Gartner and I was looking at these areas, it was like, why? I mean, I understand, okay, but at this point in time, why does IGA, PAM, and general IAM, why are they all different? Why are they not the same? Isn't a user a user? Like, isn't their identity lifecycle? They need to be onboarded. You have to create their account. You have to create their attributes. Then you have to deal with authorization, authentication, deprovisioning and account resets and this, that, and the other. And your identity platform should just handle rights and entitlements. So to me, it's like when you actually, if you were new to this industry and you came in and someone just said, this is what PAM is, this is what IGA is, this is what, and you went through all of it, you think, this is crazy. Like, I don't understand why they all exist separately, right?
Yeah, and it's that back to that silo thing, isn't it? Where you end up having these silos and these blocks of technologies, and it's like, okay, you're a mid to large size enterprise, maybe regulated, maybe not, and you think, right, we have to buy PAM. It's mandated, whatever. Maybe it's PCI DSS or something. Maybe there's a reason why you have to have some sort of privilege management. And so you go and like buy that from the shelf, and you sort of like go into Walmart and think, right, I've done that. I now need some IGA. So you go to the IGA pile and you put some of that in your basket, and you think, well, okay, I've done that. Now we need some MFA, so maybe you do like a USB dongle, and then that becomes obsolete, and you do push authentication and then passkeys or whatever. So you buy these sort of lumps of technology, and there's these huge gaps in between them because they're not cemented together. They're not joined together. You have these huge gaps, and it's like, right, okay, we've done that. Let's buy a data encryption platform or a DLP platform or something. And you do that, and that's disconnected or not necessarily integrated properly. So you have these sort of foundational sort of stones, but there's no cement between the two of them. And you have you have visibility issues, you have management issues, interop, and lo and behold, you still get breached, and you still have identity hygiene problems, and you have identity risk problems. And that to me is where I just see where we are today, and it's organizations have done these investments. They have maybe these projects have been really successful in the sense of they've done what they were supposed to do, they've integrated the use cases. Maybe there's no shelfware, which I think is still hard to believe. Everything's been deployed, everything's working, and they still have a problem. And that to me indicates there are some just structural issues, if you like, almost structural economic issues around how we've historically looked at PAM, IGA, the relationship to IAM, fraud, employee fraud, particularly, and other. And then suddenly we've just added into this sort of mix, NHI, agentic, and other stuff, which I think we'll probably cover later. But yeah, it's if you look at sort of Paolo and CyberArk, good narratives. They both talk about security from different lenses, and I agree. CyberArk have transitioned to that sort of identity security sort of narrative and mindset there, which I think is good. I think it is a strategic narrative, but I think even then, clearly, independently, they obviously both realise that they can't deliver the capabilities that they want to. Be that supporting agentic AI or just AI in general. So it is glaringly obvious that we need more stuff. We need different things or a different approach to some of these things. And yeah, for those who are watching this on video, I guess there's the little Venn diagram here, which is just part of a research note that Cyberhut released probably a few months back, I guess. And it is looking at relations between IG and PAM, which I think are becoming more closely aligned. I don't think they're entirely merging, but they are definitely we're seeing PAM vendors add in IGA Lite capabilities, and then you're seeing IGA vendors adding in PAM Lite capabilities, and you have vendors like maybe Okta and Ping, who are traditionally not from either of these backgrounds, who've been building out and adding in capabilities. But I would imagine probably to satisfy their existing customer base. Similar to CyberArk, they've done a lot of acquisitions over the past decade. Zilla was one, and there's a whole host of others. And I think vendors, when they get to a certain size and a certain age, they do find it difficult to organically grow, don't they? So they acquire stuff, which it seems to be the standard way, I think.
No, I mean, Simon, I think that's, and I should have pointed out that for folks watching on video, the really good Venn diagram of kind of showing the vendors, and it's good you get the Zilla point there going back on the notion of acquisitions. So we've certainly seen that. I mean, I think Okta bought Axiom. I think that was not too long ago, and has some friends over there. So shout out to them and congrats to that team and the Okta team. So I think certainly that's interesting. So it's interesting to kind of see this movement kind of back to PAM, and it kind of begs the question if the CyberArk Palo Alto deal has forced some of certainly I think a couple things that have come out of that, or not a couple, a lot of things that have come out of that. One being that I think it signals to the industry what you and I have already known, and that's been that cybersecurity, when you really peel back the layers, is identity. Because how do you know what, when to secure something and why if you don't know what it is, right? And that now applies to non-human and all those machines, which we've also talked about a long time ago, and how those need all the identity and then cybersecurity stuff all around it. Same thing with human identities and devices and all those things. So I think that's the signal that the industry is seeing, is that this identity thing is a big deal, and cybersecurity players need to go back to it. And again, that's why I brought up my coverage area going back to 2015. Gartner was to look at cybersecurity, data security, and these typical cybersecurity-ish things, and how identity is really coming in. Because a lot of the cybersecurity vendors, you'd be like, oh, what's your identity angle? This is a while ago. And they go, oh, we plug into Active Directory. And it's like, well, if anyone messes with Active Directory, like garbage in, garbage out for your solution, and they're just like, well, that never really happens. Like, those are answers I got. And I'm like, we'll see where this goes. Right? And history speaks for itself there. But so I think it's good to see that finally the industry has that signal. But Gartner published this note, and I don't think everyone has access to it necessarily, but Gartner has an investor group, right? So they have analysts that do all the Magic Quadrants, and they do all that stuff. But they also have an investor group, which they have analysts, and those analysts talk to investors, and investors are like, what are the areas we should look at and all this. Gartner's been talking about identity for some time and saying identity for security is important, machine identity is important. And they published a note, and I don't know if I get the title exactly right. It was the Palo Alto CyberArk deal was really about machine identity, which I tend to agree. Really what they're seeing is that, look, and Gartner research that myself and Eric Wallstrom published a long time ago, we said, like, machine identities already outnumber people.
Yeah.
And they're very privileged already. And we haven't even gotten into the agentic AI age, which these agents are going to have just as much, if not more, privilege. And there's going to be many, many more of them. And if we don't have human identity right, and even basic machine identity right, which we don't, as in terms of an industry as a whole, how are we supposed to get this agentic AI stuff ready? And again, I appreciate all the buzzwords and vendors leaning in and talking about it. But then at the end of the day, like I said about identity security, so hold on, you're an identity security company, and now you're an agentic AI security company. That was really quick. It was a really quick transition, folks. Like, can we see some proof here? Like, what are the use cases? Anyway, I'm kind of rambling on, but I think I think we're on the cusp of seeing something really interesting now accelerating, Simon. And that's going to be kind of my prediction here, is that I think we're going to start to see IAM, suck in all these disparate components. I'm not saying PAM is going away or IGA is going away necessarily. I think you'll still see niche, very detailed things that might warrant a dedicated point solution for that. But I think companies have been dealing with too many point solutions in the identity world. And now what's happening is like the platforms, they're not going to be perfect, but they'll probably cover like 70 to 80% of your use cases. Like I look at my phone and like this is a Pixel and I got an iPhone, right? And it's like, sure, I could go out and buy an SLR camera. I could buy like a super crazy MP3 player that's like very high quality audio. I could buy, you know what I mean? Like there's all these different things that a phone replaces, and the phone is good enough at being a camera, being an audio player, being a personal assistant, like all of these in one. It's not the best, but it's pretty good. And that's what I'm saying, where I think these platforms are going is you're going to start to see a cyber identity platform with identity in it. Let's just say 5 years from now, they're going to be good enough for most organizations, but there'll still be organizations that need to have dedicated things for whatever reason.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree with this. And just to extend that sort of mobile analogy further, I think a couple of things. I think all of the non-identity technology, so look at data security, endpoint security, network security, which is sort of producing, I guess, in things like SASE and zero trust or whatever. But you have these pillars typically, and they were derived because of budget. Budget gets derived because of incentives, and you have these things that you need to do. And absolutely, identity was there, but it was, as we've said many times, it was this CIO operational thing, productivity, compliance, LDAP, blah blah blah. And suddenly now it has moved from this tactical thing to being more strategic, and it's empowering these other things. Now, you may say, oh, well, my identity system doesn't integrate with these other products. You think, well, it actually does, both explicitly and implicitly. So by this, I mean, if you have a DLP system or you have a SASE platform or you have whatever it is, they're all making assumptions on the identity layer. So yes, they may take identity data from AD, but they may well take it from other systems, but they're going to take access token assertions, they're going to take federation, they're going to be taking authorization data. If you present yourself with a boring SAML assertion to some data product, that data product has an assumption that the underlying identity layers are working effectively. And that SAML assertion contains the correct claims. The person that's named in the SAML assertion is a real person. Like, there's all these implicit assumptions that get made. And we clearly know that might not be the case. It could well be a fake employee. It could be a real employee acting maliciously, and all the sort of security stuff we know there. But all of these technologies are relying upon this identity foundation to be at least working effectively, which clearly we know it isn't. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, look, to your point about integration, absolutely. And we're definitely seeing this. And other people talk about identity fabrics. We talk about virtual platforms is one I've heard quite a lot, where you say you have all of this end-to-end capabilities. So cradle to grave identity, proofing, verification, validation, storage, sessions, auth N, auth Z, offboarding, then monitoring, threat intelligence, analysis, all of the ITDR, ISPM stuff on there. And it's like, okay, that takes a village to make all of that work. And absolutely, you may well have platforms, and you can, Okta are a good example of sort of narrating themselves as doing everything. CyberArks do a lot of other stuff. Ping Identity do a lot of stuff. Everyone claims to do everything, which isn't always the case. But I think there is definitely this need to have identity integrated in more places, more systems to protect, more depth of integration with non-identity platforms. And just to amplify your sort of mobile phone example there, it isn't just your camera and your whatever telephone are all merging together. It's the information flows between those point technologies. So it's your ability for your camera to take a picture, but then you can share that with your social media stuff, or you could edit and augment the video that you create and then do. It's not just the point products that are being bolted together. It's
Yeah.
the 1+1 = 3 that you get from this. So suddenly
Yes.
your telephone becomes like a media center and a media consumption thing and a payments thing. And it isn't just your credit cards integrated to your mobile. It's the fact that that's then integrated with NFC, which is integrated with you and behavior and all the rest of it. So to me, it's those information flows of identity. And I think if you look at this sort of Venn diagram here, where you see, yeah, absolutely, Paolo's doing CyberArk, then CyberArk's buying Zilla, and then SailPoint's going left into Palm, and then Ping is sort of trying to do all of it. And so it's all about the flows of identity information.
I love that point. I think that is a fantastic point in that that's actually, Simon, a true mind shift, and a mind shift that I think absolutely is needed and necessary for the AI age, right? Because if it's all about information flows, that implies there's data, and that data needs to be like pulled together so that you understand that full flow of that user, that agent, and then you can start to predict, like, is this actually good behavior, bad behavior? Is this something we should allow them to do? Is it okay that Simon just reset his account and suddenly he's changing his rights and entitlements like immediately after a reset? Right? Like that's the problem in the industry today. You look at Scattered Spider and they would go after some of these identity platforms. They compromise a privileged user, reset their account, and then they go right in immediately to one of the portals and they start changing rights and entitlements. And then they deploy ransomware because they now have access to all these different things. That requires you, the only way to mitigate that is to think across, IGA and PAM and all this stuff, and then ITDR and orchestration. Those are the things that need to happen behind the scenes to pull all this stuff together. And I think the industry's mindset, Simon, I think is still in the, and look, I'll take the heat too in being a former Gartner analyst. There's some analysts that I talked to about this, and they were saying like, and not you, but others that say, sometimes we think that we're creating more problems. And what I mean by that is like, when you make a piece of research that's just dedicated to one technology, let's just say identity verification. Okay. Identity verification is a function, and there are products that have technologies that can do things for you, like optical character recognition and all that kind of stuff, right? But in itself, right, it's one silo. And that, and then we come up with research on authentication, right? And we come up with research on, and so the problem is like we're siloing this research and we're siloing the market definitions, when the reality is that it's actually about this holistic kind of these identity life cycles as a whole. And those life cycles are all flows. And so again, going back to the phone to use that as our anchor, I think when people are kind of past it, I mean, look, I'm going to just use the camera, right? The camera and video part of a phone. I just use that analogy, right? Sure. If I want super high quality, I want to shoot in 8K, I want to have as many frames as possible, and I want to have raw files so I can do lots of things too, right? I'm probably going to want like dedicated technology for that, right? But how many people in the world need that? Not a lot, right? There's still a need for it, right? But I think, now, but then I lose that information flow. It's on me to then take that information and put it somewhere, right? Whereas you contrast that with the phone, right? And a lot of the phones now, when I go to these events and I see some of these influencers, like they're not carrying around SLR cameras as much anymore and these other dedicated devices. And unfortunately, like I was a GoPro fan, but you look at GoPro and I think they've been hammered recently because they've got lots of competition taking them on directly, but they also, their main competition are like iPhones and Android phones that have pretty good cameras now. And the fact that it's so convenient, and your point is ultimate, that information flow now takes over. So let me just back into my first statement and connect it. We need to change the mindset of CIOs and certainly CISOs and certainly the practitioners, because they're still thinking in points. Okay. And the vendors are still thinking in points. They might talk about these big things, but I'm like, the proof is in the pudding and the pudding isn't ready yet. Right. In my view.
Yeah.
Even though the technology is ready, I just don't think the industry as a whole, both buyers and sellers, aren't ready. And so we need to have that mindset change. And AI is the forcing function, because AI is like hungry for data and we need those flows. So anyway, that is a fantastic point, Simon. Honestly, I think you should write something on that, because it's the thing that's needed. Again, if we go back to scattered spider, like if you aren't looking at the flows, you ain't stopping scattered spider or salt typhoon. I'm sorry, but you're not gonna mitigate it if you're not following flows. And points aren't flows.
100%. I think you're right as well around the maturity aspect. I think technology always ends up being in its own bubble ultimately, because it's tied to budget holders and stakeholders. And you're right, vendors, they try to extend at the edges. Oh, we do this and we do all this other stuff. It's like, well, yeah, but if you look at who you sell into, you're selling. It's only certain things you're selling, and then that goes to a particular budget. I just to amplify this a little bit. The thing I'm sharing to those who can see is an identity security model, the security scorecard essentially. And the thing I want to pull out really is just it's an end-to-end thing. It's not about we have monitoring, so we're fine. Again, that's just one other tiny pillar of part of that end-to-end approach there. And when you're talking about people, customers, employees, partners, agentic AI, NHI workloads, whatever, you need to have end-to-end management of the data, which is your profiles, policies, and permissions. You have risk in there, you have the intent analysis, you have attribution, and they're all essentially decoupled verbs. And that allows this end-to-end view of the information flow. So you've got a subject at one end, an object at the other, and there's a whole host of stuff that has to happen in the middle. And that's going to require protection. So yes, IDV, you mentioned that. You're going to need strong authentication. You're going to need zero standing privileges, just-in-time access control. Great, but they're all just tiny little strands, I guess pillars, if you like, that allow this end-to-end information platform to take place. And if you start to think like this, it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about agentic handling data, or whether it's a customer trying to buy a Netflix film, or whether it's an employee trying to access some SharePoint. It doesn't matter. It's end-to-end, the flow. And you have those multiple different integration points, and the success metrics for that are different, and they are very, very much more tied to what the business is trying to achieve, whether it's sell things, build a battleship, engage a community. It's much more closely aligned. And I do think the industry is not quite there. I think budget awareness, measurements of success and other. But I think if you are a smart vendor who can see those integration points, you suddenly become a catalyst for real change. And more importantly, the value that you bring is much more measurable and really tied to what the business is trying to do. So
Yeah.
Palm is a good example of that, but I think it is part of a bigger picture, I think.
I think just to kind of pull everything back to even the Palo Cyber PAM IGA conversation we're having, is at the end of the day, everything you do here with identity creates that information. There's information flows in the data flow, and that is that needed information across all the domains within identity that when shared, analyzed, and insights are extracted out of it, then you can be in a position to, predict, model, optimize for, your not even just from a cybersecurity identity first security perspective, but also, again, talking to a CIO, thinking about optimization, thinking about, all of these things. And I think, the other thing I'll just say, because I don't want to go down this rabbit hole today, but when you look at investments in AI today, right, most of the execs that I've talked to, they're just looking for cost savings, right, and optimization. Like, for example, like, oh, you need 5 people to do task A. Well, now with AI, I can do task A with one person who's maybe an AI engineer or something, right? On paper, okay? Reality is still going to speak for itself, and I'm skeptical with some of the things that some companies are doing. I'll be brutally honest. And I'd love to argue because I've been an early adopter and I use all of the platforms multiple times a day. I'm easily having like 50 to 200 conversations with AI a day, if not more, personal and professional. But anyway, that aside, my point is I think the ultimate thing here, Simon, is like all of these cybersecurity and identity players, in order for them to truly be AI protectors, providers, identity for security protectors of these, they have to focus on these flows, and they have to be able to pull that information and draw insights from it, because there's no way that we can keep up with, identity security threats at machine speed and all of this. But my point on the optimization is there's been too much focus on cost savings. Whereas I truly believe when you look at these information flows, and again, with these vendors doing this, you can now go back and say, I'll just talk about customer identity, for example, like, hey, we see that in the data customers are doing these particular behavioral patterns. Maybe you can, build a new product around this, because it seems like they have an appetite for this based on insights we can extract out of the information flow data. Like, no one is doing that today. Everything today is so reactive, and it's just focusing on all that stuff. And I think we get caught in this cost reduction loop. And it's the true innovators that see the disruptive ideas that will come out of these information flows. And that circles back to your point of acquisitions. I think that some of these companies are very big, and it is hard for them to innovate. And the only way sometimes for them to move forward to get that innovation is to acquire it. And I think
100%.
That's what we'll see in this space.
100%. And you can often think of acquisitions as being quite defensive as well. So ultimately, you're not necessarily acquiring to build your market share. You're acquiring because it's a defensive position for you, because maybe there's a startup coming, or maybe there's a customer requirement there which you are not fulfilling. So you acquire a smaller organization, maybe to the sort of left or right of your core competency, is a defensive mindset. And it's about, shoring up your position. It's about building that fort, not necessarily looking to go and acquire new customers. I don't imagine for a second, if you are an Okta, for example, and you're suddenly expanding and buying a little bit of PAM or a little bit of NHI or whatever, as a percentage of your overall revenue, I imagine that's going to be very, very small, tiny, in fact. And you're probably going to be cross-selling that into your existing customer base, because you're going to have several thousand customers who are spending 110K, 150K a year with you as ARR. You want that to extend and expand, and they're an existing customer. So you don't want to go and get net new customers, because that's really difficult to do. The cost of acquisition is really high. So you just cross-sell. You have your existing customer sweet spot, and you just add in and go back to them and say, hey, look, we've got extra features. Let's give you a discount. Let's make that sticky. Let's expand in that respect. So it can often be a defensive mindset. And I think you're absolutely spot on around, I think AI will allow this 1 + 1 = 5, because not only do you have the optimization thing, but you can listen. You can listen to, in the B2C space, you can listen to what's happening. But more to your point, you can respond. So even if you are listening effectively and you're saying, do you know what, our customers are not happy, or they're asking for something we don't have, that may take you a hell of a long time to go and build something in the back end, ship it, get it to market. And I don't really mean about microservices or the speed of coding. I mean, what to code, not how to build it, but what are you going to build? Why are you going to build it? And I think AI is going to collapse a lot of that into really, really sort of short response cycles. I think back to the information flow thing, identity is just all over that stuff.
Yeah, a couple points, because Simon, I think you created a monster here with this information flow point, but it's brilliant. I mean, so look, a couple things. One, I think you posed the question earlier on, just with like CyberArk and Palo Alto, and even generally speaking, like, we look at Okta and Axiom and, these vendors buying this stuff. Yes, defensive, excellent point, right? There's offensive and defensive reasons why they would do it, and then other strategic reasons. But some of the conversations I've had with industry leaders on the Palo thing, it's like, look, will they be successful with it in cross-selling and upselling? Sure, because I think one conversation I had was like, how Palo is very good with creating these swim lanes, and they can put a lot of excitement on a theme and or products or solutions, put a lot of marketing, go-to-market focus on it, and then drive it into market and go from there. But the issue that a lot of these vendors are going to struggle with is that on paper, it might look good. We could draw we could take the Venn diagrams that you put together and say, oh, okay, they've bought something over here, over here, over here in each kind of bubble, and you can kind of see these coming together. On paper, it might look good. But when you're really, really big, sometimes it's like execution is going to be everything, and how it actually works. So I'm not saying that, I'm not going into this with a negative mindset. I think this is all good for the industry. But again, I want to see how they're going to roll this out in the next, 1 to 2 years is going to be very indicative of what ends up happening to this, right? There's been some mergers and acquisitions where it's like, it effectively just takes some of the technology out of the market, and it gives consumers less choice. I think we saw that a little bit with the Ping ForgeRock acquisition. I mean, I don't know how they can use two overlapping technologies. Something has to get cut at some point, and it's been a while. And then there's still been market confusion of like the Auth0 Okta situation, right? Like Auth0 is still this awkward gem within. Not saying like other things that Okta aren't, but it's like that's always like, if you look at any write up with Okta, overall, and especially if there's any discussion of a B2C, as you mentioned, or partner, business partner, that's always been like this weird thing that hasn't been fully integrated. So on paper, it looks nice, but in practical terms, at the end of the day, if I talk to a practitioner, they're like, yeah, that was nice, but it's not doing anything for me. Or that was nice market wise, great, but it's causing more issues. But on the information flow one, if we bring it back to that, I just had this little epiphany, and you tell me if I'm crazy or not. I think that, like, another analogy. Okay, so move away from a phone here for a moment. I've been saying for some time now, when we think about identity, is that we want it to be like Cheers. Remember that show?
Yeah.
And the theme song, everyone, you want to go where everyone knows your name, blah, 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 right? And it's like, that's what customers want of their services. I want to be able to show up and they know who and you have to balance creepy and cool, right? But I want to be able to show up and they're like, oh, David, yeah, you have been a long-term banking customer of ours. We know that you do these types of things with us, right? And we know you so well. And so now imagine you are the service. You're the airline, you're the bank, you're the retailer or e-commerce. Imagine you are my bartender, right? And in the world of Cheers, if we're playing off of that, your bartender was like, not only did they just provide you the service of like selling you maybe snacks and maybe some food and drinks, but they also were kind of like your psychologist too, in a way. But I'm not saying I want my bank to be my psychologist. I'm saying like they end up knowing me so well that he could sit there and be like, hey, Simon, I noticed that you tend to, order these, IPAs a lot, right? And I love that. Why do you like IPAs? Yeah, I love them, blah, 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 blah. Hey, I have this really new like Hefeweizen. Maybe you should give it a try. I'll give you a little sample, right? And so the bartender has all that information, all the flows that you've done with them. And they have it in their mind, and they kind of know like what's actually like what Simon truly wants, what Simon is there for, and maybe you don't like that Hefeweizen when you try it, but he had to try it. So I think my point is here is that like services need to move away from this blocky mindset to being more natural and actually thinking about the journey of the user, of the partner, of the customer, and of the agent, and what's more appropriate for them. And then over time, taking that information to make those predictions. And those predictions, in my view, I mean, it means you can solve the security issues, or at least mitigate them, because now you understand like Simon's not doing something that's normal. Like he came into the bar and it looks like him, but he's ordering, red wine mixed with white wine. First of all, Simon never orders wine. And second of all, why is the dude mixing the two together? Right? A good bartender would know that's not Simon, and that's also very weird behavior. Like, I'm going to stop this right now, and pull off his deep fake mask. And oh, look at that. It ends up being some hacker group, right? So it's going to get us into that position, but then it'll also help, I think, with the cost optimization, because now you can start to optimize things. But also it allows, again, going back to the bartender insight and saying, I know what I should keep on my shelves. And I also know of other opportunities I can sell, being like, hey, maybe I can get Simon to come back one more night a week by tying in football, or let me say soccer matches and promotions around those matches once a week, because I'm somehow able to triangulate that he likes beer and he likes football, right? So anyway, I'll stop on that. But you have definitely, I love that point you made. I mean, information flows. That's what it's all about nowadays.
Yeah, it is. It really is, and it's that's some really good examples there in that BTC thing, and it's the solving the privacy sort of personalization paradox, and as you say, once you have that information, be able to deliver before it's asked for. But that second point about the sort of deepfake thing is really interesting. I'm doing quite a lot of research at the minute around intent. That's a word, bug behavior. It's a word that gets thrown around quite a lot around intent. What's the intent of this? And it's okay. We understand about intent. We've given them an OAuth 2 access token with really scoped claims, and it's like nothing to do with this. That's a totally separate thing. That's your provisioned access and credentials. Isn't something you get from the logs, because if it's in the logs, it's done. And this is the other subtle aspect around when you talk about monitoring about stuff. Everyone's, we've got Uber, we've got Splunk, and not criticizing any of those vendors or concepts or whatever else, but user entity behavior analytics and stuff that was looking at 10, 12 years ago. Those massive terabytes of log storage, which costs an arm and a leg, which nobody looks at. If it's in the logs, it's already happened because it's in the logs, right?
It's a fantastic point.
It's not in flight, it's done. Just to amplify and extend the information flow thing, and sort of wrap up this episode, I guess. And obviously, there's all the stuff around security at the minute, identity and threat detection response, and the security integration. The big thing, if you think about identity, is that attack lifecycle. So you're talking now about deepfake attack or some sort of fraud or whatever it can be.
Yep.
Now, being really subtle and basic about it, the attack has a starting point and an end point. Now, the start of that is very blurred in some respects. It could be, if you look at MITRE ATT&CK, it could be reconnaissance. That's the starting point, ultimately, where you're not really actively doing anything, but you're gathering information to plan your attack. And then you've got a whole host of initial access, credential theft, privilege escalation, lateral movement, all those different MITRE ATT&CK stuff, which is absolutely perfect. Now, they don't often get applied to identity specifically. They get you look at applications, or you look at specific parts of this flow. And the thing which is emerging more and more is the identity attack lifecycle, because if you have an information flow of identity, you're going to have this attack lifecycle aspect, which requires the ability to clean and look at identity hygiene. So you're trying to prevent attacks from happening by removing ghost accounts, getting rid of excessive permissions, doing your nice access reviews all the time. Good stuff. That's nice preventative hand washing and hygiene. But then there's another part to this, which is looking at, well, okay, what happens when somebody's authenticated and logged in? How do I know that it's Simon? Well, you need strong attribution. So you need to tie my session to a biometrically verified and validated real person, not a deep fake or whatever. So that's one aspect. But then you want to be looking at what I'm doing, comparing my behaviors to myself. So back to your bar analogy, maybe I do go in for a vice beer on a Tuesday, but then suddenly on a Friday I'm in there downing 10 pints. It's like, is this guy had a bad day at work? It's change in behavior, right? So the barman might be like, what's going on here? Is that some sort of situation he needs to do? So there's that behavior thing. So you need to compare behavior to myself, but then compare my behavior to others. So maybe if I'm drinking 10 pints because it's a World Cup game, and England have just won, which they did last night, hasten to add, in a friendly. So it's peer comparison. So New Year's Eve, whatever, everyone's drinking high. So it's comparative in that respect. So those patterns are quite well understood. And for those in colour watching the screen, I want to talk about the attack starts, but you want to detect the attack before it ends. It seems really simple, really hard to do, because lots of things, mean time to detection, and you've got to respond. At what point do you respond? At what point is this thing triggered enough composite risk factors to you to say, actually, yeah, he is drinking a lot and this is not right, and blah, blah, blah. You've got to identify that, and then you have to identify the appropriate response. And it may not be kicking the guy out the bar, to keep the bar analogy. It may well be just saying, do you know what? Finish this drink, your time's up, and you do a nice, graceful, fine-grained response. So there's when to respond, how to respond, and ultimately you want to do this before the attack is completing, because at that point, in honesty, it is too late. So we're nowhere near that as an industry. And I think there are some interesting approaches to this. But if we talk about flaws, we need to get identity embedded into that security world where we are looking at everything end to end and looking at the data, looking at the runtime, identify risk, responding to risk at the right time.
I think, Simon, I agree, and I know we're wrapping this up, but I think certainly in a future episode, taking this same notion and conversation and applying it to, especially I know you've been doing a lot of traveling, a lot of events. I've got the FIDO Authenticate event next week.
Yeah, San Diego.
And I'd love to come back to this and have the conversation about machine identity and HI, because I think those are human stuff. But what I think a lot of practitioners, and you tell me as well, right, are starting to say, hey, as we let these agents go wild in our environments and so on and so forth, it's like we haven't even solved these problems. People, process, and tech.
People.
Now we have this coming in. And the theme of my presentations I'm going to be doing throughout the remainder of the fall, from Gartner IAM to some webinars with Forrester and Coop and Nicole, is really around, like, it is going to be agentic AI and identity security and these flows, that notion. But the point I make now is that AI browsers, and I think I mentioned it in our last talk, but AI browsers, in my view, yes, they're not like, they have agent tech in them and they're not full blown agents, but like what Apple did for biometrics, right? Bringing Touch ID to the world, to the masses. I strongly believe, and it's not really a belief anymore because the evidence is it's moving so fast, that all the major browsers are becoming AI browsers. And that is going to bring AI, not only Gen AI, to the masses, because believe it or not everyone uses ChatGPT. That's one. But two, it's going to bring agentic tech to the masses. So now every human online, and this is going to happen inside your company too, they're going to use features in these browsers, and it's going to be crazy to block them, frankly. They're just all going to look like bots online. They're all going to look weird. So going back to what you said about, that the thinking about identity, security, and all those elements that you mentioned, Simon, similar model. It's just going to completely change the context and how we are going to deal with this. And it's going to have to put us into a point of where we can respond back to machine speed time, which is like insane.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. There's definitely going to be a set of podcasts here on that. 100%. I think the AI browsers, yes. Agentic AI authorizations, another one. I think responding at the speed of light and hopefully responding before this bad stuff's happened, I think is definitely another one. But let's leave it there for now.
It's a lot.
We could definitely spawn a few more threads here, but I mean, look, the good stuff is this stuff is moving at the speed of light, and I think it's the benefits of getting this right are huge. I think that's the one thing. I think if organizations and vendors can sort of see that and tie that together, the benefits are huge, which I think will foster more change for us to discuss. But okay, maybe let's park it there for today. Dave, as always, thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences that you're gathering around the world on your tours. Good luck with Authenticate coming up soon in San Diego. I will not be there. I've 3 weeks on the road, so I'm going to be
you need a break
in the UK. I've got a few other things coming up, a CrowdStrike event in the UK, and I've got Future Identity happening in the UK in a week or two, or a couple of weeks time as well. So
nice.
As David, thank you for sharing your insights to the audience. Thank you for tuning in, either audio or visual. Again, reach out, add any comments, as you always do, to keep us on the right track and make sure we're saying the right things as ever. But David, thank you for taking some time out. Thank you for listening, and we'll